The sound of shattering glass cut through the smoke-filled saloon, and Abigail Vaughn's heart sank as she watched the drunk cowboy stumble backward, his boot grinding the shards into the sawdust-covered floor. It was barely noon in Ordway, Colorado, and already the Silver Dollar Saloon was filled with men who had nothing better to do than drink away their weekly wages and make a mess she would have to clean. She grabbed her broom from behind the bar, keeping her eyes downcast as she always did, trying to remain invisible even as she moved through the rowdy crowd. The year was 1882, and for a widow of only 24, her options were limited in this dusty cattle town on the edge of the prairie. "Watch where you are stepping, madam," a deep voice said, and Abigail looked up to find a tall man with sun-weathered skin and serious gray eyes looking down at her. His hand had caught her elbow, steadying her before she walked right into the broken glass. "Would not want you getting hurt." "Thank you, sir," Abigail said quietly, pulling her arm gently from his grasp. She had learned not to encourage attention from men in the saloon, even the polite ones. They always wanted something eventually. "Name is Samuel Quinn," the man said, removing his hat. His dark hair was slightly gray at the temples, and Abigail guessed him to be in his early 30s. "I own the Bar Q Ranch about 10 miles north of town. I have not seen you here before." "I have been working here for 3 months," Abigail replied, continuing to sweep the glass into a pile. "Since my husband passed. I am sorry for your loss." Samuel's voice was sincere, and when Abigail glanced up at him again, she saw genuine sympathy in his eyes. "This is no place for a woman alone." "Well, it is where I work, so it is exactly the place for me," Abigail said, a hint of defiance creeping into her voice. She was tired of being pitied, tired of being looked at as some helpless creature who needed rescuing. Samuel studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Fair enough. Could I get a whiskey, please? The good stuff, not the rot gut you serve most of these boys." Abigail propped her broom against the wall and moved behind the bar, grateful for the solid wood between them. She poured him a measure of the better whiskey they kept for the few customers who could tell the difference and afford it. Samuel laid his coins on the bar, his fingers calloused and scarred from years of ranch work. "You are too fine for this place," Samuel said quietly, his eyes meeting hers. "A woman like you deserves better." "You do not know anything about me," Abigail replied, but there was no real anger in her words. She was used to men making assumptions, but something about Samuel's tone was different. He was not trying to seduce her or insult her. He seemed genuinely concerned. "Maybe not," Samuel admitted. "But I know you keep your head down, you work hard, and you do not encourage these drunks when they get rowdy. That tells me plenty." Before Abigail could respond, a commotion erupted near the back tables. 2 miners were shoving each other, arguing over a card game gone wrong. Abigail sighed, knowing from experience that this would likely turn into a full brawl within minutes. "Break it up," the saloon owner, Dutch Morris, shouted from his position near the stairs. He was a heavy-set man with a bald head and a perpetual scowl. "Take it outside if you want to fight." The miners ignored him, and soon fists were flying. Other patrons scrambled to get out of the way, and Abigail pressed herself against the back wall of the bar area, hoping to avoid any stray punches. She had been hit once before, accidentally, and her jaw had been sore for a week. Samuel drained his whiskey in one swallow, set the glass down carefully, and walked toward the fight with the unhurried gait of a man who had handled plenty of trouble in his life. He grabbed both miners by their collars and hauled them apart with surprising strength, holding them at arm's length as they continued to swing at air. "Enough," Samuel said, his voice carrying a weight of authority that made both men pause. "You want to kill each other over a $2 pot," you do it somewhere else. This lady does not need to clean up your blood along with everything else." He jerked his head toward Abigail, and both miners had the grace to look ashamed. Samuel marched them toward the door and shoved them outside into the dusty street. When he returned, he brushed off his hands and walked back to the bar as if nothing unusual had happened. "Thank you," Abigail said, meaning it. "You did not have to do that. Like I said, you deserve better than this." Samuel picked up his hat from where he had left it on the bar. "I come into town every Saturday to pick up supplies and take care of business. Maybe I will see you again." "Maybe," Abigail agreed, watching as he walked out into the bright afternoon sunlight. She felt something she had not experienced in months, maybe years. A tiny flicker of interest, of curiosity about another person. She pushed it down firmly, reminding herself that she could not afford such feelings. Her life was hard enough without complicating it with foolish notions. That evening, after the saloon finally closed and Abigail had finished scrubbing the tables and sweeping the floors, she climbed the narrow stairs to her small room on the second floor. It was barely big enough for a bed and a washstand, but it was hers, and it was included as part of her wages. She poured water from the chipped pitcher into the basin and washed the smell of tobacco smoke and spilled whiskey from her skin, then sat on the edge of her bed and allowed herself to cry. She cried for her husband, Thomas, who had died 6 months ago from a fever that had swept through their small homestead outside of town. She cried for the baby she had lost 2 years before that, the tiny son who had never drawn breath. She cried for the life she had imagined when she was a girl in Kansas City, before she had married Thomas and followed him west with dreams of land and opportunity. But Abigail did not allow herself to cry for long. Tears changed nothing, and she had learned that survival required strength. She dried her face, lay down on her thin mattress, and stared at the ceiling until sleep finally claimed her. The next Saturday, Samuel Quinn returned to the saloon, and the Saturday after that. He always ordered the good whiskey, always left a generous tip, and always found a reason to talk to Abigail, even if it was just a few words about the weather or the quality of the beer. Other customers noticed, and Abigail became uncomfortably aware of the knowing looks and whispered comments. "That rancher has taken a shine to you," said Molly, one of the saloon girls who entertained men upstairs. She was a brassy redhead with a kind heart beneath her hard exterior. "Samuel Quinn is a good man, from what I hear. Treats his ranch hands fair, pays his debts, does not cause trouble." "He is just being friendly," Abigail said, wiping down the bar with more force than necessary. "Nothing more." "Honey, men like that do not come to a saloon every week just for the whiskey," Molly said, laughing. "He is courting you whether you realize it or not." Abigail did realize it, which was exactly the problem. She did not know if she was ready for courtship, did not know if she would ever be ready. Thomas had been a good husband, if not an exciting one, and she had loved him in her own quiet way. The thought of opening her heart to someone new felt like a betrayal, even though she knew Thomas would have wanted her to find happiness again. It was mid-September when everything changed. Abigail was serving drinks during a particularly busy Saturday night when she heard Dutch Morris calling her from his office upstairs. Her stomach tightened with anxiety as she climbed the stairs, wondering what she had done wrong. Dutch was not a patient man, and he had made it clear more than once that he expected his employees to earn their keep. "Sit down, Abigail," Dutch said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. His office was cluttered with papers and empty bottles, and it smelled of cigar smoke and unwashed clothes. "We need to have a talk about your future here." "Is something wrong with my work?" Abigail asked, perching on the edge of the chair. "If I have done something to displease you, I can do better." Your work is fine, Dutch said, leaning back in his chair. But I have been thinking. You are a pretty woman, Abigail, prettier than you realize. And pretty women can make a lot more money than serving drinks and sweeping floors. Abigail's blood turned cold as she understood what he was suggesting. No, she said firmly. I am not interested in that kind of work. Now, do not be hasty, Dutch said, his voice taking on a wheedling tone. Think about it. You would make 10 times what you are making now. You could save up, maybe buy yourself a little place somewhere, live comfortable. What you are doing now, that is barely surviving. The answer is no, Abigail repeated, standing up. Her legs felt shaky, but she kept her voice steady. I would rather scrub floors for the rest of my life than do what you are suggesting. You think you are too good for it. Dutch's expression hardened. Let me tell you something, widow woman. You are working in a saloon, which means you are already ruined in the eyes of respectable society. Might as well profit from it. If that is how you feel, then I will find work elsewhere, Abigail said, moving toward the door. Her heart was pounding, and she knew she was likely making a terrible mistake. Jobs were scarce in Ordway, especially for women. But she also knew that if she stayed, Dutch would not let the matter rest. He would pressure her again and again until she either gave in or was forced to leave anyway. You walk out that door and you are done here, Dutch warned. I will not take you back, and I will make sure every other business owner in this town knows you are a troublemaker. You will not find work anywhere. Abigail paused with her hand on the doorknob. She thought about the few coins she had managed to save, barely enough for a week's room and board. She thought about the coming winter and the cold Colorado nights. She thought about how easy it would be to just stay, to accept the security of a job she hated but at least understood. Then she thought about the look in Samuel Quinn's eyes when he had told her she was worth more than this place. She opened the door and walked out without looking back. She packed her few belongings into a canvas bag, changed out of her saloon dress into her regular clothes, and left the silver dollar before she could lose her courage. It was nearly midnight, and the streets of Ordway were dark except for the lights spilling from the various saloons and gambling halls. Abigail stood on the wooden sidewalk, clutching her bag, and tried to figure out what to do next. The hotel wanted payment in advance, which she could afford for maybe 3 nights if she ate sparingly. After that, she would need to find work quickly, despite Dutch's threats. There was a general store that sometimes hired help, and the restaurant on Main Street had been looking for a waitress last month. It was not much, but it was a plan. Abigail started walking toward the hotel, but she had only gone a few steps when she heard her name being called. She turned to see Samuel Quinn riding toward her on a large bay horse, his expression concerned. "Abigail, what are you doing out here this time of night?" He dismounted and walked toward her, leading his horse. "Is everything all right?" "I am fine," Abigail said automatically, then felt tears prick her eyes. She was not fine. She was terrified and exhausted and so very tired of being alone. "Actually, no, I am not fine. I just quit my job or got fired. I am not entirely sure which, and I do not know what I am going to do." Samuel was quiet for a moment, studying her face in the dim light from the saloon windows. "What happened?" Abigail hesitated, then decided she had nothing to lose by telling him the truth. She explained about Dutch's proposition, about her refusal, about his threats to blacklist her from other jobs in town. Samuel's jaw tightened as she spoke, and she saw anger flash in his eyes. "That snake," Samuel said quietly. "I always knew Dutch Morris was a low character, but this is beyond decency." "It does not matter now," Abigail said, wiping at her eyes with the back of her hand. "I just need to find a new position quickly before my money runs out." "Come work for me," Samuel said suddenly. "At the ranch." Abigail stared at him. "What? I need someone to help with the house," Samuel continued, the words coming faster now as if he was working out the idea as he spoke. "My cook and housekeeper, Mrs. Peterson. She is getting on in years and has been asking for an assistant. The work would be hard but honest. You would have your own room in the main house, meals included and fair wages. Better than what Dutch was paying you, I guarantee that." "I do not know," Abigail said slowly. The offer was generous, almost too generous. What would people say? "A widow living at a bachelor's ranch. Mrs. Peterson lives there too, and 3 of my ranch hands have wives who live on the property," Samuel said. "It is all perfectly respectable, and honestly, I do not care much what people say anyway. I care about doing what is right, and right now, the right thing is helping you." Abigail wanted to say yes. She wanted it so badly she could taste it, the thought of leaving Ordway and the silver dollar behind, of waking up to fresh air instead of stale smoke. But she was also afraid. Afraid of accepting charity, afraid of what she might be feeling for Samuel Quinn, afraid of being hurt again. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "You barely know me." Samuel was quiet for a long moment, then said, "Because the first time I saw you in that saloon, trying to be invisible while you worked yourself to exhaustion, I thought it was the saddest thing I had ever seen. A woman like you, with so much dignity and strength, reduced to serving drinks to drunks and being propositioned by men who do not see your worth. And then I got to know you a little bit over these past weeks, and I realized I was right. You are worth more than that place, Abigail. You are worth more than this whole damn town." Abigail felt something crack open inside her chest, some wall she had built up to protect herself. She looked at Samuel, really looked at him, and saw not pity in his eyes but respect. Admiration, even. When was the last time someone had looked at her that way? "All right," she said softly. "I will come work for you, but I am doing this as your employee, nothing more. I need you to understand that." "I understand," Samuel said, and she believed him. "Come on. Let us get you settled at the hotel for tonight, and I will come by tomorrow morning to take you to the ranch. We can work out all the details then." He walked her to the hotel and waited while she checked in, then tipped his hat and rode off into the night. Abigail climbed the stairs to her room, lay down on the bed, and for the first time in months, she felt something almost like hope. The next morning dawned clear and bright, and Samuel arrived at the hotel just after breakfast driving a sturdy wagon. He helped Abigail load her bag into the back, then handed her up onto the seat beside him. As they drove out of Ordway, heading north across the rolling prairie, Abigail felt as if she was leaving more than just a town behind. She was leaving behind a version of herself she did not want to be anymore, a beaten-down widow with no prospects and no future. The Bar Q Ranch was beautiful. The main house was a solid 2-story structure built of whitewashed wood, with a wide porch that wrapped around 3 sides. Beyond it were the bunkhouse, the barn, several corrals and pastures that stretched as far as Abigail could see, filled with cattle bearing Samuel's brand. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks already dusted with early snow misses. Peterson turned out to be a plump, cheerful woman in her 60s with gray hair, pulled back in a bun, and a German accent that became thicker when she was excited. She welcomed Abigail warmly, showed her to a small but clean room on the 2nd floor, and immediately put her to work helping prepare the midday meal for the ranch hands. "Mr. Samuel, he is a good man," Mrs. Peterson said as they peeled potatoes together in the kitchen. "His father started this ranch 30 years ago, and Samuel took over when his parents passed from cholera 10 years back. He works hard, treats everyone fair, and does not put up with nonsense." "Has he ever been married?" Abigail asked, trying to sound casual. Mrs. Peterson shook her head. There was a girl back when he was younger, but she decided ranch life was too hard and married a banker from Denver instead. Broke his heart, though he never talks about it. Since then, he has been married to this land. Abigail absorbed this information, understanding Samuel a little better. He knew what it was like to be hurt, to have your dreams crushed. Maybe that was why he had been so kind to her. The days fell into a rhythm. Abigail woke before dawn to help Mrs. Peterson prepare breakfast for the ranch hands, a rowdy group of cowboys who were respectful but curious about the new woman in their midst. After breakfast came cleaning, laundry, mending, and preparing for the next meal. The work was harder than serving drinks had been, but it was also more satisfying. Abigail fell into bed each night genuinely tired rather than just exhausted, and she slept deeply without nightmares. Samuel was around the ranch most days, working alongside his men to move cattle, repair fences, or handle the 1,000 other tasks that came with running a successful operation. He was always polite to Abigail, always respectful, but she caught him watching her sometimes with an expression she could not quite read. 2 weeks after Abigail arrived at the ranch, a late September storm rolled in from the mountains, bringing freezing rain and wind that rattled the windows. One of the ranch hands, a young man named Pete, was thrown from his horse and broke his arm badly. Samuel rode into town to fetch the doctor, and by the time they returned, Pete was delirious with pain. The doctor set the bone and gave Pete laudanum for the pain, but he needed someone to sit with him through the night to make sure the fever did not get worse. Abigail volunteered, settling into a chair beside Pete's bunk in the bunkhouse with a pile of mending to keep her hands busy. Samuel appeared around midnight with a cup of coffee and a blanket. "You should get some sleep," he said. "I can watch him for a while." "I am fine," Abigail said, accepting the coffee gratefully. "Besides, I am better at nursing than you probably are. I took care of my husband when he was sick." Samuel sat down on the bunk across from her, and for a while they sat in comfortable silence, listening to the storm rage outside and Pete's labored breathing. "Tell me about your husband," Samuel said finally. "If you want to, I mean. You do not have to." Abigail was surprised to find that she did want to talk about Thomas. "He was a good man," she said. "Not exciting or romantic, but steady. Reliable. We met in Kansas City when I was 18. He was 10 years older than me, working as a clerk. We married after a short courtship, and then he got this idea that we should go west, file a homestead claim, make something of ourselves." "And did you? Make something of yourselves?" "We tried," Abigail said. "We filed our claim, built a little soddy, planted crops. But Thomas was a city man at heart. He did not really know farming, and I did not either. We struggled. And then I got pregnant, and we were so happy. We thought a baby would make everything better, make all the hardship worth it." Her voice cracked, and Samuel reached across the space between them to take her hand. She let him, grateful for the contact, for the warmth of his rough palm against hers. "The baby died," Abigail continued. "He was born too early, and he never breathed. We buried him on our land, and after that, things were never the same between Thomas and me. We went through the motions of living, but the joy was gone. And then last spring, the fever came. Thomas fought it for 2 weeks, but in the end, his body just gave out." "I am sorry," Samuel said quietly. "That is a lot of loss for one person to bear." "What about you?" Abigail asked, not wanting to dwell on her own sadness. "Mrs. Peterson told me you were in love once." Samuel's smile was rueful. "I was young and stupid, thought I could give her everything she wanted. But Catherine wanted society and culture and excitement, and I could only offer her ranch life and hard work. She made the smart choice, marrying someone who could give her the life she wanted." "You still love her?" "No," Samuel said without hesitation. I have not thought about Catherine in years, except as a lesson learned. You cannot make someone want the life you want. They either see the value in it or they do not. And what kind of life do you want? Abigail asked. Samuel looked at her for a long moment, his gray eyes serious in the lamplight. I want this ranch to prosper. I want to build something lasting, something that will matter. But I also want someone to share it with. Someone who understands that a good life is not about fancy parties and expensive dresses. It is about honest work and watching the sun rise over your own land and sitting on the porch after a hard day knowing you accomplished something real. That sounds like a good life, Abigail said softly. It is, Samuel agreed, but it is a lonely one when you are living it by yourself. The moments stretched between them, charged with possibility. Then Pete groaned and shifted in his sleep, and the spell was broken. Samuel stood up, squeezing Abigail's hand once before letting go. Get some rest, he said again. Call if you need anything. After he left, Abigail sat in the quiet bunkhouse, her hand still tingling from his touch, and admitted to herself what she had been trying to deny for weeks. She was falling in love with Samuel Quinn. The realization terrified her. She had not wanted to feel this way again, had not thought herself capable of it after everything she had lost. But Samuel had slipped past her defenses with his quiet strength and his steady presence, and the way he looked at her, as if she was something precious. October arrived with cold mornings and brilliant aspens turning gold in the high country. The cattle had to be moved to winter pasture, a massive undertaking that required every available hand. Samuel asked Abigail if she knew how to ride, and when she admitted she did, though not well, he assigned her one of the gentler horses and put her to work helping drive the herd. It was exhilarating and exhausting, spending long days in the saddle under the vast Colorado sky. Abigail's muscles ached, and her face got sunburned despite the bandana she tied around her neck, but she had never felt more alive. She understood, watching Samuel work with his men and his cattle, why he loved this life so much. There was a freedom in it, a sense of building something real with your own hands. On the third day of the drive, they camped under the stars. Mrs. Peterson had stayed back at the ranch, so Abigail helped the camp cook prepare beans and biscuits for the crew. After everyone had eaten, the ranch hands sat around the fire telling stories and singing songs, their voices rising into the night air. Samuel appeared at Abigail's elbow, offering her a cup of coffee. "Walk with me," he asked. They walked away from the fire, toward where the herd was bedded down for the night. The cattle were dark shapes in the moonlight, and somewhere a coyote howled. Samuel stopped on a small rise that overlooked the temporary camp. "I have been thinking," Samuel said, "about what I want and what you might want, and whether those things could ever align." Abigail's heart began to race. "What do you mean?" Samuel turned to face her, his expression serious. "I meant what I said that night in town. You are worth more than serving drinks in a saloon. But you are also worth more than just being my housekeeper. You are smart and strong and brave, and you deserve a full life, not just a job." "Samuel, let me finish," he said gently. "I know you have been hurt. I know you lost your husband and your child, and you are probably scared of caring about someone again. I understand that. But I also see how you look at this land, and how you smile when you are out here under the sky. I think you could be happy on this ranch, Abigail. And I know I could make you happy if you would give me the chance." Abigail felt tears prick her eyes. "I am scared," she admitted. "I am so scared of losing someone else I love. I do not know if I can survive that again." "Nobody knows what the future holds," Samuel said. "I could get thrown from a horse tomorrow, or you could catch pneumonia, or 1,000 other things could go wrong. But we could also have 50 good years together. We could build something beautiful, something lasting. Is not that worth the risk? He was right, and Abigail knew it. Living in fear was not really living at all. It was just existing, just marking time until death finally claimed you, and she was so tired of just existing. Yes, she said, the word coming out as barely more than a whisper. Yes, it is worth the risk. Samuel's face broke into a smile, and he cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away the tears on her cheeks. Is that a yes to what I am thinking, or just to the general philosophy? Abigail laughed, the sound surprising her with its lightness. What are you thinking? I am thinking I want to marry you, Abigail Vaughn. I am thinking I want you to be my wife, not my housekeeper. I am thinking I have been half in love with you since that first day in the saloon, and completely in love with you since about a week after you came to the ranch. And I am thinking life is too short to waste time pretending otherwise. Then yes, Abigail said. Yes to all of it. Yes to you. Samuel kissed her then, gentle and sweet, and Abigail felt the last of her walls crumble. She wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him back, pouring all of her hope and fear and love into that moment. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathless. We should probably tell the others, Samuel said, grinning like a boy with a secret. Before they start gossiping and get it all wrong. Let them gossip, Abigail said recklessly. I do not care what anyone thinks anymore. But they did tell the ranch hands, who cheered and clapped Samuel on the back and made jokes about the boss finally finding himself a good woman. And when they returned to the ranch a few days later, Mrs. Peterson cried happy tears and immediately began planning a wedding feast. They were married in early November, on a crisp morning with snow threatening in the clouds overhead. The ceremony was held in Ordway's small church, with Mrs. Peterson and the ranch hands in attendance, along with a scattering of townsfolk who had always liked Samuel and were curious about his bride. Abigail wore a simple blue dress that Mrs. Peterson had helped her make, and Samuel wore his best suit, looking handsome and slightly uncomfortable in the formal clothes. The preacher led them through the vows, and when Samuel slipped a gold ring onto Abigail's finger, she felt a sense of rightness settle over her. This was where she was meant to be, standing beside this man, promising to build a life together. After the ceremony, they held a celebration at the ranch. Mrs. Peterson had outdone herself with the food, and someone produced a fiddle, and soon everyone was dancing in the barn, their breath misting in the cold air. Samuel held Abigail close as they swayed to the music, his hand warm on the small of her back. Happy, he murmured into her ear. Yes, Abigail said, and meant it with her whole heart. I did not think I would ever be this happy again. Well, you better get used to it, Samuel said, because I plan on making you happy for a very long time. That night, alone in the room they would now share, Samuel was patient and gentle, erasing the painful memories of loss with new ones of love and tenderness. Abigail had not expected to feel desire again, had thought that part of her had died with her first husband. But Samuel awakened something in her she had not known was sleeping. They learned each other slowly, carefully, and when Abigail finally fell asleep in his arms, she felt safe for the first time in years. Winter came hard to Colorado that year. Snow piled high against the barn, and the temperature dropped so low that water froze in the troughs within minutes of being poured. Samuel and his men worked tirelessly to keep the cattle fed and safe, sometimes being gone for days at a time checking on herds in distant pastures. Abigail worried when he was away, but she also learned to trust in his capability and his knowledge of the land. She threw herself into ranch life, learning to make butter and cheese, to preserve vegetables for the long winter, to mend harnesses and tack. Mrs. Peterson became more of a teacher than a supervisor, showing Abigail, all the skills she would need to eventually run the household herself. And in the evenings, when the work was done and the ranch was quiet, Abigail and Samuel would sit by the fire in their room and talk about everything and nothing, building the foundation of their marriage one conversation at a time. By January, Abigail began to suspect she was pregnant. She waited to be sure, not wanting to raise Samuel's hopes only to have them dashed if she was wrong. But when she missed her second monthly course and began feeling queasy in the mornings, she allowed herself to believe it might be true. She told Samuel on a Sunday afternoon when the ranch was quiet and they had stolen a few hours to themselves. They were sitting on their bed, and Samuel was reading the newspaper that had arrived from Denver the day before. Abigail put her hand on his arm and he looked up, seeing something in her face that made him set the paper aside. "What is it?" he asked. "Are you all right?" "I am fine," Abigail said. "Better than fine. Samuel, I think I am going to have a baby." She watched his face carefully, afraid of what she might see. But Samuel's expression transformed into pure joy. He pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "Are you sure?" he asked against her hair. "When?" "I think sometime in August," Abigail said. "But Samuel, I need to tell you something. I am scared. After what happened before with my first baby, I am terrified that something will go wrong again." Samuel pulled back to look at her, his hands framing her face. "Nothing is going to go wrong," he said firmly. "We are going to take care of you, and you are going to take care of yourself, and in August we are going to have a healthy baby. I believe that with everything in me." "I want to believe it too," Abigail said. "Help me believe it." "Every single day," Samuel promised. "Whatever you need, whatever will make you feel safe, you just tell me and I will make it happen." He kept his promise. As Abigail's pregnancy progressed, Samuel became almost comically protective. He insisted she rest more, do less heavy work, eat extra portions at meals. Mrs. Peterson supported him completely, taking over most of the physical labor and making sure Abigail always had fresh water and snacks available. The ranch hands, when they found out about the baby, treated Abigail like spun glass, jumping to help her with anything that required lifting or reaching. At first, Abigail chafed against all the coddling. But as her belly grew and she felt the baby move inside her, she began to appreciate the care. This pregnancy felt different from her first. She was healthier, better fed, not exhausted from trying to survive on a failing homestead. And she had Samuel, who loved her and supported her and made her feel cherished. Spring came late that year, but when it finally arrived, it was glorious. The prairie exploded with wildflowers and the cattle grew fat on new grass. Samuel began planning for the future, talking about expanding the herd, maybe building a new barn, putting in a vegetable garden closer to the house so Abigail would not have to walk so far. "You are planning for a big family," Abigail teased him one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. She was 7 months along now, her belly large and round beneath her loosened dress. "Maybe," Samuel admitted, grinning. "Would that be so bad? This ranch is big enough for lots of children." "Let us see how we handle one first," Abigail said, but she was smiling. The truth was, she could picture it too. Children running through the house, learning to ride, helping with the animals. A real family, something she had almost given up hope of ever having. In late July, when the summer heat shimmered over the prairie and the cattle sought shade beneath the scattered cottonwoods, Abigail's pains began. Mrs. Peterson sent one of the ranch hands racing into town to fetch the doctor while she got Abigail settled in bed and began preparations for the birth. Samuel paced outside the bedroom door like a caged animal, and Abigail could hear him wearing a path in the floorboards. "Tell him to stop that," Abigail gasped between contractions. He is making me nervous." Mrs. Peterson went to the door and spoke to Samuel in firm tones, and the pacing stopped. The labor was long and hard, lasting through the night and into the next afternoon, but Abigail never lost faith that this time would be different. And when her son finally entered the world, red-faced and screaming with healthy lungs, Abigail cried tears of joy and relief. "He is perfect," the doctor said, wrapping the baby in a clean blanket and placing him in Abigail's arms. 10 fingers, 10 toes, good strong heartbeat. Congratulations, Mrs. Quinn." Samuel was allowed into the room then, and his face when he saw his son was something Abigail knew she would remember forever. He sat carefully on the edge of the bed, touching the baby's tiny hand with one finger, his eyes wet with unshed tears. "We did it," he said softly. "We really did it." "We did," Abigail agreed, exhausted but happy. What should we name him? They had discussed names but never settled on anything definite. Now, looking at his son, Samuel said, "Thomas, after your first husband. He gave you life when he brought you west, even if things did not work out the way you both hoped, and this baby would not be here without that journey." Abigail felt fresh tears slide down her cheeks. "Thomas Samuel Quinn," she said. "That is perfect." The baby thrived. Thomas was a good baby, healthy and alert, with Samuel's gray eyes and Abigail's dark hair. Mrs. Peterson doted on him shamelessly, and the ranch hands competed for the privilege of making the baby smile. Samuel was a natural father, patient and gentle, getting up in the night to help with feedings and changings without complaint. As Thomas grew, so did the ranch. Samuel's hard work and good management paid off, and the barbecue became one of the most successful operations in that part of Colorado. They hired more hands, bought more land, improved their stock. Money was never abundant, but it was steady, and Abigail never had to worry about how they would pay for food or supplies. 2 years after Thomas was born, Abigail gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah. She had Samuel's quiet strength and Abigail's determined spirit, and from the moment she could walk, she followed her father everywhere, wanting to learn everything about the ranch. 3 years after that came another son, James, who was sweet-natured and loved animals with a passion that made him a natural horseman. The years passed in a blur of work and love and laughter. The children grew tall and strong, learning to ride and rope and take care of the land that would someday be theirs. Abigail watched Samuel teaching them, patient and firm, instilling in them the values of hard work and integrity that had built the barbecue. Mrs. Peterson eventually retired, moving into a small house in town that Samuel bought for her, and Abigail took over full management of the household. There were hard times, of course. A drought one year that decimated their hay crop and forced them to sell off some of their breeding stock. A winter so harsh they lost a dozen cattle to cold and starvation. A bout of scarlet fever that swept through the family, leaving all 3 children sick and Abigail terrified that she would lose them. But they weathered every storm together, Samuel and Abigail, their partnership only growing stronger with each challenge they faced. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Samuel surprised Abigail with a trip to Denver. They left the children with Mrs. Peterson, who had temporarily moved back to the ranch for the occasion and took the train to the big city. Abigail had never been to Denver, and she was amazed by the tall buildings, the electric lights, the crowds of people on the streets. Samuel booked them a room at one of the finest hotels, and they spent 3 days acting like tourists, visiting museums and restaurants and theaters. On the last night, they dressed in their finest clothes and went to a proper restaurant with white tablecloths and candles. "You ever regret it?" Samuel asked over dessert. "Marrying me, taking on this life. You could have found someone in town, lived an easier life." Abigail reached across the table to take his hand. "Not for one single second," she said. "You gave me everything I did not even know I wanted. A home, a family, a purpose. You saved me, Samuel, not just from the saloon, but from a life of just existing. You taught me how to live again." "You saved me too," Samuel said quietly. "I was just going through the motions before you came along, building the ranch but never really thinking about why or what it was all for. You gave me a reason. You and the children, you are the reason I do everything." They kissed across the table, not caring who saw, and Abigail felt the same flutter of excitement she had felt when Samuel first kissed her under the stars during that cattle drive so many years ago. Time had not diminished what they felt for each other. If anything, it had deepened it, adding layers of respect and partnership and shared history to the foundation of love. When they returned to the ranch, the children ran out to meet them, shouting and jumping with excitement. Thomas, now a serious boy of 9, was trying to maintain his dignity, but even he could not completely hide his happiness at having his parents home. Sarah, 7, launched herself into Samuel's arms, chattering about everything that had happened while they were gone. James, the baby at 4, clung to Abigail's skirts and would not let go. "Did you miss us?" Abigail asked, laughing. "So much," Sarah declared. "It was terrible without you. Mrs. Peterson makes us go to bed on time and everything." "The horror," Samuel said solemnly, winking at Mrs. Peterson over Sarah's head. Life continued its steady rhythm. The children grew and changed, each developing their own personality and interests. Thomas was serious and responsible, already showing signs of being able to take over the ranch someday. Sarah was bold and adventurous, always pushing boundaries and testing limits. James was the peacemaker, sweet and empathetic, with a gift for handling animals that exceeded even his father's considerable skill. When Thomas turned 16, Samuel began officially training him in all aspects of running the ranch. He took the boy with him to cattle auctions, taught him how to read market reports, explained the finances and planning that went into a successful operation. Thomas absorbed it all like a sponge, asking intelligent questions and offering thoughtful observations. "He is going to be better at this than I am," Samuel told Abigail one night. They were in their 40s now, both of them showing gray in their hair and lines around their eyes from years of squinting into the sun. But they were still strong, still healthy, still deeply in love. "He learned from the best," Abigail said, snuggling closer to Samuel in their bed. Outside, a spring storm was rolling across the prairie, and she could hear rain drumming on the roof. "You have given him such a solid foundation." "We have given him a solid foundation," Samuel corrected. "Everything I have accomplished, I accomplished because you were beside me." It was true, and Abigail knew it. They were a team, partners in every sense of the word. She handled the house and the finances and kept the whole operation running smoothly behind the scenes. Samuel managed the land and the cattle and the men. Together, they had built something that would last long after they were gone. Sarah announced at 15 that she wanted to become a teacher. Abigail was surprised but supportive, helping her daughter study for the examination that would allow her to teach in rural schools. Sarah passed with high marks and got her first position in a small school about 20 miles from the ranch. She rode there on Monday mornings and came home on Friday evenings, full of stories about her students and their progress. James wanted to be a veterinarian, a relatively new profession but a growing one. Samuel and Abigail scraped together the money to send him to veterinary college in Fort Collins when he turned 18. It was hard having him so far away, but they were proud of his ambition and his dedication. The years continued to pass. Thomas married a rancher's daughter from a neighboring spread, a sensible girl named Martha who fit into ranch life as if she had been born to it. They gave Abigail and Samuel 3 grandchildren in quick succession, 2 boys and a girl, and the house was once again filled with the sound of children's laughter. Sarah married one of her fellow teachers, a gentle man named Robert who adored her and supported her passion for education. They settled in a small town about a day's ride from the ranch and visited as often as they could. James returned from veterinary school and set up a practice in Ordway, becoming the go-to animal doctor for ranchers across 3 counties. He married a sweet girl who worked at the general store, and they had 4 children who spent their summers at the barbecue, learning the same lessons their father had learned as a boy. Abigail and Samuel grew old together, their bodies slowing but their minds still sharp. They spent more time on the porch and less time working, content to let Thomas run the day-to-day operations of the ranch. But they were still involved, still offering advice and wisdom gained from decades of experience. On a warm evening in late summer, when Abigail was 68 and Samuel was 74, they sat on that same porch where they had spent so many evenings over the years. Their grandchildren were playing in the yard, and the smell of dinner cooking drifted from the kitchen where Thomas's wife was preparing the evening meal. "Look at what we built," Samuel said softly, gesturing to encompass not just the ranch but the family, the life they had created together. "Not bad for a widow who worked in a saloon and a lonely rancher, is it?" "Not bad at all," Abigail agreed, taking his hand. His fingers were gnarled with arthritis now, but his grip was still strong. "You were right, you know, that day in Ordway when you said I was worth more than that place. I did not believe you then, but you do now. Now I know I was worth exactly what you thought I was," Abigail said, "because you helped me see it. You helped me become the person I was always meant to be." Samuel raised her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "I love you, Abigail Quinn. Every single day for the past 40 years, I have loved you more than the day before." "And I love you," Abigail said, her eyes misting with happy tears. "Thank you for saving me. Thank you for giving me this life." They sat together as the sun set over their land, casting everything in shades of gold and amber. The grandchildren's laughter rang out across the yard, and somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed peacefully. It was a perfect moment, the kind that makes a whole life feel worthwhile. Samuel passed away peacefully in his sleep 2 winters later, at the age of 76. Abigail grieved for him deeply, but she also felt grateful. They had been given so many years together, so many memories, so much love. He had lived to see all his children settled and happy, had held all his grandchildren and even 2 great-grandchildren. Not everyone was blessed with such a full life. Abigail lived on at the ranch for another 8 years, surrounded by her family and the land she had come to love. She spent her days helping with the great-grandchildren, tending her garden, and sitting on the porch where she and Samuel had spent so many evenings. She never remarried, never even considered it. Samuel had been the love of her life, and she was content to wait until she could be with him again. She passed away in her sleep on a spring morning when the prairie was covered in wildflowers. She was 76 years old, the same age Samuel had been. The funeral was large, attended by family and friends from across the state. Her children spoke about her strength and her kindness, about how she had transformed the barbecue from just a ranch into a true home. Her grandchildren remembered her stories and her wisdom and her gentle hands. Her great-grandchildren would carry memories of her love for the rest of their lives. They buried Abigail next to Samuel on a hill overlooking the ranch, under 2 matching headstones. As the mourners dispersed and life went on, as it always does, the barbecue continued to thrive. Thomas ran it until he was old enough to pass it to his own son, who passed it to his daughter, who passed it to her son. The ranch stayed in the family for generations, a testament to what Samuel and Abigail had built together. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the wind blew soft across the prairie and the sunset painted the sky in brilliant colors, people claimed they could see two figures sitting on the porch of the old ranch house. A tall man and a slender woman, holding hands and watching over the land they had loved, together for all eternity. The story of how Samuel Quinn had told the widow working in the saloon that she was worth more than that place became a family legend, passed down through the generations. It was a reminder that sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected places, that love can bloom even in the hardest soil, and that every person has value, even when they cannot see it themselves. The Bar Q Ranch stood as a monument not just to hard work and good land management, but to the transformative power of believing in someone, of seeing their worth when they cannot see it themselves. And in Ordway, Colorado, though the Silver Dollar Saloon was long gone and the town had grown and changed beyond recognition, old-timers still told stories about the widow and the rancher whose love story had become the stuff of legend. Young people heard the tale and dreamed of finding that kind of love themselves. It became a touchstone, a reminder that no matter how dark things might seem, redemption and happiness are always possible if you have the courage to reach for them. The legacy of Samuel and Abigail Quinn lived on not just in their descendants, but in the very soil of the Bar Q Ranch. In every fence post Samuel had set and every garden Abigail had planted. It lived on in the values they had instilled in their children and grandchildren. Hard work, integrity, kindness, and the unwavering belief that every person has inherent worth. These principles guided the Quinn family for generations, shaping not just their ranch but the entire community around them. In the end, what had started as an impulsive offer of employment from a rancher to a desperate widow had blossomed into one of the great love stories of Colorado's ranching history. It proved that sometimes the greatest adventures begin with a simple act of kindness, and that telling someone they are worth more than their circumstances can change not just their life, but the lives of everyone they touch for generations to come. The Bar Q Ranch stood as living proof that love, partnership, and mutual respect could build something that would outlast any single lifetime, creating a legacy that would endure as long as the prairie wind blew and the mountains stood tall against the Colorado sky.